way when it gets arthritis that you can also get nerve involvement with it.
Let me shift to the fingers. So like a lot of folks are working with keyboards these days at a computer or word processing, whatever. Even kids with their phones and connections there. Is that a spot where you'll really feel this kind of thing? Because as I got older, I've always hit a keyboard fairly hard and fast. In my job as a reporter, you got to crank them out quick, and sometimes you just fly through it and not think about it. And then later on, you flex your fingers and you go, "Oh my God, that's achy." So, are we talking about like an arthritic thing there, or what do they call it, carpal tunnel? Are they one and the same, or is there a difference?
Yeah, there is a difference there. So, if it's a repetitive activity, that is, you're thinking more along tendons. So you've got muscles that attach to the bone, and that muscle then turns into a leader or a sinew. That's what you could make. In the old days, you could make arrows out, not arrows, the string, a bowstring out of a sinew. That's a tendon. And those tendons go and attach to bones, and when the muscle contracts, it shortens, it pulls that tendon, and then it moves whatever extremity. It's a great design. It moves that extremity in place. Well, when a person is doing a repetitive activity, that tendon can be overworked and it can cause a tendonitis. So some of that aching may be a tendonitis. Now, carpal tunnel syndrome is kind of in the same pack with that, because if a tendon is overworked and it can swell, then it goes to a closed space right at the bottom of your wrist. That's where your carpal tunnel is, right? If you push against a door or something, that's your palm, on the end of your palm. Then that tendon getting bigger, going through a closed space, can put pressure on the nerve, and that's why you're getting the tingling. So generally, if you're having a numbness, a tingling, I always say those are electrical symptoms. That means it's your nerves in your body are literally like electrical circuits. That is the electrical conduction apparatus in your body. And so when you get a tendon bigger and it pushes on that nerve, nerves don't like pressure and they start tingling. And a good example of that is when you hit your funny bone. That's not a bone. That's your ulnar nerve. And when you tap your funny bone and it zings down your fingers, that's what it feels like with nerve compression.
So, like if you were to accidentally bump your elbow against the door, and all of a sudden you get that, oh, I hit my funny bone. That's what we're talking about.
That's right. That's a real live demonstration of dinging your ulnar nerve, and it does not like it.
All right, now I guess staying with the hand and the fingers, is there something that maybe a person could do or remember to kind of relieve some of that problem? Stop and flex your fingers or whatever else?
No, I think that's a good idea to always, like for your example where you're keyboarding, if your fingers are continually in a keyboarding motion, you're making a fist, you're clenching your fist. And so that would make the muscles a little tighter, bending, that are making the fist. So the activity in that situation would be to stretch it in the opposite direction of what you've been doing, which would be to bend your fingers and your wrist back as far as you possibly could. Feels kind of good, and that will stretch out the muscles that are getting overworked and stretch the tendons a little bit too.
So that's something you can do right there at your desk, then, right?
There you go.
All right. Now, as we grow older, is there a particular age when we'll start to feel this kind of, let's call it an affliction right now, or can it hit anybody?
Well, that's kind of the deal, and this is where it starts getting complicated, because when you say arthritis, what we generally are meaning is osteoarthritis, which is the, quote, wear and tear, end quote, arthritis. It means you just literally wear it off. The problem with that is, this is where some people inherit money and some people inherit bad joints, is that some of that can be genetic and some of it can be activity related on the wear and tear side. And then there also are things that are post-traumatic arthritis that kind of fall in that same category. What I mean by that is, your glory days in high school when you had that injured knee and you limped off the sidelines and went back and played and everything was great. I always tell people, you're 18 today, but you're going to be 48 tomorrow, and that's when you start paying for it, because when you've had a damage to a joint, it never works quite right again, and that predisposes you to wearing that joint out quicker, and that would be post-traumatic arthritis. It's going to behave similar to osteoarthritis, and technically it is osteoarthritis, but it's a result of that injury that you had.
Okay, for example, years ago in some of my younger days, I was in Alaska skiing, and we had hit a little ridge there, and all of a sudden that ski locked up, and I felt like I hyperextended the muscle there, and most specifically in my calf. And today, even to this day, I'll get an occasional twitch, as they call it. And is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, that may be arthritis, or that could be just a muscle injury that it scarred. So it could be either one.
Well, anyway, I gave up skiing. So now, here at the Mvskoke Creek Nation, what is the numbers of patients that you might see or deal with that would be afflicted with arthritis?
Well, I'm a little biased because I'm an orthopedic surgeon, so I'm seeing the bone, the joint, things that are, so for me, it's a high number of the patients I see are dealing with arthritic issues. But it's a very common problem, and the older you get, the more likely it is to happen. Now, I'm kind of more commonly seeing the people that have the wear and tear arthritis and the post-traumatic arthritis. However, there's another category of arthritis, and that's where there's something wrong with your joint. So that's a whole different animal. And those are the people that have gout, rheumatoid arthritis, lupus, all these weird diseases where your body starts attacking itself and it just literally destroys the joint on your body does it to you. And that is oftentimes more seen by our primary care team, who are treating those because it's attacking their whole body, all their joints. They're generally treating that with all these fancy new pills and injections and stuff for inflammatory type arthritis. We get involved some, but not as much surgically.
Okay, but you don't have a feel for the numbers that you see, or a percentage perhaps, just a ballpark?
Boy, I don't know. I would be lying to guess that. It's common. It's very common.
Is it more common perhaps with Native Americans than anyone else? Has anyone ever done anything on that?
No, I don't know of a study that says Native Americans probably have a higher incidence. There is the only thing that I can think of that maybe is a unique bad arthritis that we ought to talk about for your listeners, I mean, is what's called Charcot arthropathy. And this is a unique thing that happens in the Native American population because diabetes is so rampant in our population, where they get neuropathy. And the neuropathy, people always ask, what is neuropathy and diabetes? Do I have that? And I always explain it this way, and that is neuropathy is not absence of nerve function. So as a diabetic progresses and they get neuropathy, and this is an important point, I think, they say, well, what does that mean? He says, well, you don't feel. And the patient says, well, of course, I still feel. I stubbed my toe and it hurt. And when I try to explain is neuropathy is not what you think it is. It's not paralysis. It's not your nerves aren't working at all. It's that your nerves aren't working as well as they used to. So I tell them it's like people that are hard of hearing. Everybody around them knows they're hard of hearing except the patient. Because you ask them, do you hear okay? And they go, what? And you say, do you hear okay? And they go, yeah, fine. So they're not deaf. It's not that they can't hear at all. They just don't hear as well as they used to. And so where this comes back to arthritis is diabetics can get what's called a Charcot arthropathy. And what happens is they don't feel as well as they used to. And they're romping around on their feet. And normally you would have said, oh my gosh, my feet are killing me, and I'll put them up and you don't go more. But they don't feel as well as they used to. So they keep walking on that foot and they can get a specific diabetic arthritis called Charcot arthropathy. And when you see these poor folks who have these deformed feet that have diabetes, that's what's caused it.
Are there warning signs, red flags that you can think of that might be a signal of oncoming arthritis and pain in the joints?
No, not really. You're pretty much going to know as we age, right? We get long in tooth and gray hair. For some of us, we lose hair. You're knowing it. You get up in the morning in stiffness. In the days when you got knocked down and you wanted to jump up, not think that you were knocked down, now you look at the referee and say, when's the 10 count? And I'm going to get up the second before that happens. So those are more the wear and tear osteoarthritis kinds of scenarios. Now, the ones that are a little more concerning are the inflammatories, and those are things that you ought to seek care sooner about. There is one exception on that, and that's an infectious arthritis. So if a person's ever been poked with a wire stick or something around your knee joint or any joint in your body, and all of a sudden it just blows up huge and red and swollen, that is an emergency, and that's something you need to go to the emergency room. The other unique one, arthritis on the infective side, are kids. And kids, because they're still growing, can do this weird thing that adults can't do, and that is they can actually get an infection in their joint without ever being stuck. They can get bacteria from an upper respiratory tract infection or something circulating in their bloodstream, and it can actually get into their joint. So if a kid blows up with a big swollen joint, no history of injury to it, that's a concerning thing, and they are very painful when they have that, and usually they always present to the ER, but we'll throw that in as a bonus there.
Okay. Well, for us who are on the backside of 50, is there something that we can do to either prevent or alleviate these symptoms?
Well, you tell me, and we will both be gazillionaires, and there we will be. What I tell people about arthritis is this, and we're talking wear and tear arthritis here, is it's kind of like a car, right? So if you have your dad's 65 Chevy or Mustang, whatever your vehicle, if you take that 65 Chevy that your dad well cared for, it's a running vehicle, and you say, oh, I'm going to take great care of it. I'm going to park it in the garage and never use it. And you come back in a year and you pull that thing out, it won't run. Tires out around, set them in the gas tank, fan belt slips off, and you think, my gosh, I drove it into the garage. So what I mean by that is if you have a vehicle, you don't just park and do anything. You don't just stove up and do nothing with arthritis. So in that sense, I think you use it or lose it, okay? However, you don't take that 65 Chevy, Mustang, whatever you want it to be, Camaro or Mustang, you don't take it and take a road trip to Canada and try and hot rod through the Midwestern states because it'll fall apart before your very eyes. And to me, that's kind of like we are as we get on the backside of 50 and beyond, is you don't want to do nothing with it. You can just ramrod and go nonstop. But by the same token, you don't want to just lay around and do nothing. Moderation becomes a major factor there in staying mobile and productive.
So in the case of us human muscle cars, we need to sort of, I guess, use it or lose it. Is that kind of a philosophy?
As long as we're not parking it in the shop and doing nothing with it, and we're not out hot rodding it and squealing the tires out, because that ends poorly. Because what happens when you take that muscle car, that vintage, that's what it is. It's a vintage muscle car, and you run it too hard with that, and you get an arthritic joint flared up. The problem is we don't bounce back like we used to. In the old days, when a young kid has a great resilient capability in their joints and they can go out and do things you can't imagine, they're sore, they're stiff, they work it out and they're fine. But that older model doesn't do that. And so the price you pay if you push it too hard is you get things sore and they don't get unsore very quick. So the bounce back is very slow. And I tend to think that makes a person less active because they just say, I'm old, I'm useless, I can't do anything. It's like, no, you can do things, you just can't do them the way you used to do it. So you just have to modify. And I think the folks, the elders that modify and learn that, stay active and productive way into their 90s. But that's the trick, is not to be out hot rodding it. You do it moderately. You get the car out, you take it out to Sunday, you drive to Sonic, get your Slurpee, or not a Slurpee at Sonic, I guess a slushie at Sonic.
Well, I've taken apart a few cars in my time and can understand you just don't want to go out and drop the clutch and burn up your rear end too many times without paying some dues for it. Now, what sort of resources are available here at the Tribal Department of Health to assist someone who's starting to feel these things?
So if we're talking the inflammatory arthritis, they're probably already going to be seeking care for that, and that's a different animal. But for the wear and tear kind of stuff we're describing, just the backside of 50 and beyond, the simplest thing to take over the counter, assuming you have no liver issues, is Tylenol. Now, Tylenol is a funny medication. If you take Tylenol, like it says on the bottle, it's a very safe drug. If you take Tylenol with a fifth of Jack Daniels or whatever, it's hard on the liver. So Tylenol is not a drug that you take more than what it says on the bottle. The other problem with Tylenol is it has a short half-life. So if you're taking it for arthritis, you take the extended release or the Tylenol arthritis. No more than what it says on the bottle. That's probably the safest thing you can take. If you move into the other medications, and that's your Motrin and Aleve, that would be involving our team on writing a prescription, if you're writing a prescription, one of those. The problem with the non-steroidals, and I'm talking Motrin, Aleve, and everything else that's a prescription, is the side effect profile is worse. So generally, that's a more second-line drug that you take, that the Tylenol isn't cutting it. If you're a nutrition guy, then what gets the nod in my head, maybe not from the medical community as much anymore, is glucosamine and chondroitin. Now, I don't want to offend anybody that's selling nutritional supplements, but it's generally a simple ingredient. It's basically cartilage, which is cow windpipes or shark cartilage and seashells, so there's not a lot of high complexity to that. I personally don't think that the more expensive, and I say more expensive, these things can get very expensive, are necessarily any better than Sam's Choice or your nutrition shop's generic, well reputable thing. The thing about glucosamine and chondroitin is it's sold as a substitute that it's going to put new cartilage on the end of your bone. It's often marketed that way, and I don't feel comfortable telling people that's what it does. However, there have been good medical studies, double-blinded. Nobody knows what they're taking. Nobody knows anything. Everything's blinded. And there have been some that show a moderate improvement in their symptoms after 2 months of taking that. So if I was having arthritic symptoms, I dang sure would try a trial of glucosamine and chondroitin because it's a pretty safe thing to take.
With all of the controversy concerning opioids, is there anything that you've talked about that people would have to really pay attention to avoid any complications like that?
Yeah, you're going to get a very biased opinion of me regarding narcotics. I think it's a very bad choice. If the Tylenol, the Motrin, and that stuff isn't working, then you may get a referral within our system to me, and some of the primary care docs do this for injections, which are like corticosteroids, or they have this stuff made out of chicken comb. Mm-hmm. It's not chicken comb, but that's where it originally came from. And those injections, and beyond that, you're talking surgeries. And if it's severe arthritis, you're doing a joint replacement. On the opioid topic, the problem with opioids that I tell people is it's not that you don't hurt, and it's not that the opioid doesn't work. The problem is how an opioid works. And how an opioid works we've known for centuries. And what it does is it plugs a receptor in your body, an opioid receptor that gives you pain relief. The problem with an opioid is that when you have your receptors exposed to that opioid, your body makes more receptors, so you become tolerant to the opioid. Well, now this is a recipe for a disaster. If you have a condition that we know is going to get worse, and you're taking a medication that you get tolerant to, where's that story going to end? And that's why I think narcotics are not a good choice for a condition that, even though it's causing pain, that is going to get worse, that you're getting tolerant to. It's typically, in my opinion, not a good choice to go down.
Now, and listening to your response there, I'm thinking, well, if you shut off your pain receptors, you run the risk of doing more damage to your body because you can't feel when you get hurt. Would that correct?
I'm dead on with you, and I just had that conversation a few minutes before we had this interview, that when an animal injures, if a coyote breaks his leg, there's a mechanism. Pain receptors are not a curse. God loves you, or whatever you believe in, design or evolution, whatever made you in this remarkable thing that's a human body, it works. And pain receptors are literally your warning light. If we go to the car analogy, I tell people is if you're taking something and blocking that pain, that's like you're annoyed because the oil light's on in your car and you unplug the wire going through the oil light. You can't do that. So if you've addressed the problem, you've splinted it, you've had surgery or something like that, or it's going to get better, then absolutely take pain medication. But for a long term, to keep turning that off, pain is a warning system, and it's literally, if the coyote has a broken leg, it's telling him when it's okay to start putting weight down on it. If he's fully wired, then he's going to generally do the right thing. And that's kind of goes back to the diabetic neuropathy. That's the problem, is their pain receptors are literally shut off, and it gets them in trouble.
Okay, finally, I guess I'll ask you for a word of advice here for people who are getting up in years and beginning to wonder whether or not they're having to deal with an arthritic condition. What would you say to them to kind of look out for, and maybe what sort of care should they be exercising to take care of themselves?
Well, I think weight is an issue, and this is a prickly issue because if someone is carrying extra weight, it's all too often a medical community will sometimes just say, well, if you lose weight, your legs wouldn't hurt. And I'm very cautious to tell somebody that because if you have arthritis in your knees, and certainly weight is associated with, particularly in knees, an increased incidence of arthritis. However, you still have that degree of arthritis. So if you lost all your weight to your ideal body weight, you're still going to have that degree of arthritis, although your symptoms might be less because you have less force across it. So I think if you're going to say something, it would not be super inactive, not be hot rodding, as we say, and dropping clutches, and to watch the weight. Try to keep the weight under control, I think would be a huge plus for that.
Dr. Nichols, we're interested in something that's fairly common.
And volleyball tournaments, and the All-Indian Rodeo that started it all. Live entertainment hits the stage on Friday and Saturday nights. All events are free and open to the public. It's the Mvskoke Creek Nation Festival, June 21st through the 24th in Altmalgi.
Yes, there you are. I hear you now.
Yeah, we're having a bit of a problem hearing you, so we're going to have to ask you to speak up and help us out there.
Okay, how does that work? Is that better?
Yeah, let's see. Let's try that. Okay, try it again.
I'll just keep talking and
All
let
right.
you know how that sounds.
All right, now we got something listenable. Apologies to our listeners for blowing their ears out there. But yours truly occasionally still fumbles with the board here. Okay, now we haven't talked to you in a bit. First of all, how are you doing? I would kind of like to know what you've been up to.
Well, I am doing well. I'm here in Tulsa this morning. I'm still part of the Tulsa Artist Fellows. I'm in my second year, and I've been bouncing around between here in Oklahoma City and California.
Oh my God, that's a lot of bouncing there.
Isn't it?
Well, what have you been working on? First of all, we're going to be talking about your new play, but what else have you got up your sleeve there?
Well, working on some still illustrations. If you pick up this month's edition of Oklahoma Today, there's one of my illustrations of Cherokee scientist Mary Golda Ross that accompanies an article about her. She was a scientist slash engineer for NASA back in the 50s and 60s.
An engineer?
A lady engineer. And a Cherokee Indian engineer.
What particular field was she looking at?
I believe it was math and science. I know that she was part of the space program as well, and helped out with all of those, the moonshot and everything.
Well, my gosh, that sort of reminds me of what was the movie that came out, Hidden Figures?
Yeah, Hidden Figures. She's definitely the native version of Hidden Figures.
Well, that was a story about the black women who actually made much of the space program happen by doing a lot of mathematical things that are far above my head. That's why I became a journalist.
Yes,
okay.
that one's coming out. Be part of a traveling exhibit in the next year here that features some Mvskoke artists. Because as you know, I may be tribally enrolled Kickapoo, but my mother is tribally enrolled Mvskoke Creek, and she lives right there in Okmulgee.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember what town and clan?
I don't know what her clan is, but I know her family came from Holdenville.
Okay, well, it's close enough, I think. The comic book world is one of the realms that you deal with. You've been having some activity in that one with, was it Super Indian?
Yes, that and Tales of the Mighty Code Talkers. Yeah, since I last talked to you, Tales of the Mighty Code Talkers was on the short list for Best Graphic Novels for Youth by the American Indian Library Association, and was also mentioned by the larger American Library Association as one of the best 100 graphic novels of the past year. So that book has really gone far and wide and has really kind of put a lot of the artists and the people that were in the book on the map as far as artists and getting a lot of work. So that makes me happy.
Well, that literature has come a long way, and at least in my lifetime. Remember, as a kid, we used to call those things funny books. and then they became comic books, and nowadays they are graphic novels, right?
Indeed.
So I presume you fit into that third category. And what is it about your work then that makes it fit there, graphic novel? It sounds almost foreboding in some sense, but then it may not be, right?
It isn't actually. In fact, it's not that far off from comics, although comics are usually just static, like maybe like 1 or 2 pages. Comic books, a standard 23-page story, and a graphic novel is just a longer format in which to tell a story. In Tales of the Mighty Code Talkers, we challenged everybody contributing to try to tell a quick story, a little snapshot, in 8 to 12 pages. And that was a real challenge because we tackled a lot of different, tribes, a lot of different, theaters of war, everything from World War II, World War I, Korea. And hopefully we'll generate another book in the next few years that talks about what happened after they came back.
Well, I find the Code Talker series kind of intriguing. First of all, why did you choose that particular area of expertise, and how did you go about assembling the components? I mean, World War I trench is, galaxies and light years away from what we know here today. So how did that happen?
Well, it happened sort of serendipitously because my friend and co-publisher Lee Francis, who's Laguna Pueblo, and I were at the Denver Comic-Con about 5 years ago. It was the first time we'd been there, and we didn't really have a lot of stuff for our booth because both of us just had maybe about 1 or 2 books out. And Lee focused in on an image I had drawn of a grandfather reading a comic book with his granddaughter. And the book they were reading, at least in my mind, was Tales of the Mighty Code Talkers. And it was just a small, tiny image that Lee said, hey, could I have the image that you made of that comic book? And he blew it up to larger size. And whenever people came by our booth at Denver Comic-Con, they stopped in their tracks and said, I want that book now. I want it now. And that's how it happened. We said, well, gosh, there's a demand. We need to make this happen. So it took a couple of years to actually get everyone together, figure out the format, and then actually write, draw, color, ink, letter, and lay everything out and then get it published.
Let me ask you about the research you might have done in the characters that were illustrated. I mean, you got a nasty, muddy trench, and then you have soldiers in that old-fashioned dishpan kind of helmet, Springfield rifles instead of the World War II M1. How did you come about that, and particularly any scenes of the enemy?
Well, I did a lot of research personally. The one that I did was called Anumba Luma, which was about the Choctaw Code Talkers of World War I. Again, there's a lot more research on that particular tribe from their own scholars and their own people that were out there. There was a great article in their tribal paper about these World War I veterans and what they did, and a lot of other resources that I kind of gathered together, and then just did a lot of time on the internet, a lot of time in libraries, just to make sure that the outfits were right, the colors were right, and also to take a look of who were the people that they were up against, and of course Germans, and this was something that happened in France. And, I just thought, this kind of, it's not historically, like it's this guy's story. We kind of sort of had to fill in the blanks because, the Code Talker program was top secret until I think the late 80s. So there, these soldiers weren't even able to tell their own families what they had done. So, piecing things back together, we kind of invented a little bit and maybe embellished a little bit, but the stories that we've heard since the declassification were just amazing.
Yeah, how did you deal with some of the more gruesome scenes that evolved out of that particular conflict? You know, we're talking about huge destruction of not only the landscape but human bodies. I mean, what were your thoughts when that kind of thing presented itself, if it indeed it did?
Well, what my sort of guidelines for this project was something that children could read. And so I had to do some editing there as far as like not really tell the artist that, you know, don't show this or don't show that. It's like find a way to tell that story without using the graphic violence so that younger people could take a look and read and kind of absorb what these people went through, but without all of the gore. Because I personally don't like to do that kind of work. I know there's other artists that are, you know, that's their thing, you know, but me, I really want to reach a widest audience as possible. And sometimes that means editing the gross stuff that really happened.
Mm-hmm. Well, we've seen the Hollywood movies, you know, incorporate that thing, those kinds of things into their work these days, and there's no reason to repeat it. I don't think it's kind of a part of our own history that we need to put behind us. Now, has there been any reaction from the Choctaws or any other tribes, or even the World War II Navajo guys who were code talkers, or from their tribes?
As far as I know, and the vets that I've talked to that have looked at the books, they're very, very happy with them, and especially happy because they do reach a wider audience. This stuff is now, you know, schools are buying them. Libraries are making sure that they're in the library alongside with the more, you know, well-known graphic novels. So it's really a way for us to get a place in those schools, in those libraries, to share the stories of our people and the sacrifices they made. Because, again, a lot of people, you know, outside of our community don't understand how many veterans we have and how important our veterans are to our community. So I think that, you know, having a book like this and maybe more is really a great thing for all of us in the Native community.
Now, these products, your work there, is kind of a change of pace for something like a Comic-Con. What kind of impact now is the Native presence making at those kinds of shows? Do people spend much time talking to you about it?
They do, and every time I've been to a show that's not like an exclusively Native shows, because now there are actually Native Comic-Cons that are starting to happen. There's one at the end of the month in Little Axe. The Absentee Shawnee is putting on the Indigenerd Conference on June the 30th. And then in November, there's a larger Indigicon, which is, I think, in their third year in Albuquerque. But, you know, there's SoonerCon, there's Phoenix Comic-Con, Denver Comic-Con, San Diego Comic-Con. They still don't really recognize our work and that we're out there. It's hard to get into San Diego Comic-Con. It's, you know, some of these shows you just can't even get into if you haven't been showing there for a long time, or, you know, want to put out, you know, hundreds of dollars for booth space.
Well,
believe me, that's rough. It's rougher than any powwow.
Well, that's an aspect nobody knows about. You got to pay to get in there, and I understand that even to be in the crowd, be a spectator, a visitor, you can't have too much luck if you don't get your request in early, because these things sell out, right?
Yes, especially the bigger shows like, you know, San Diego is like the granddaddy of them, and you almost have to have been going for at least 10 years or more to even get in to buy a ticket.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
The latest work you've been doing now, you've taken it to the stage. You premiered a little bit of it with us, with Darren DeLon doing some reading, I understand. And now the new play, I understand it's a romantic comedy, Round Dance, where you're bringing that to a festival in Oklahoma City, right?
Yes. What's exciting about the evolution of round dance is that it started as just a crazy idea about, well, first of all, I was thinking there aren't many plays or stories I've seen about the government relocation program, which was, of course, for the younger folks, this initiative to take Native people from their reservations or from their communities and move them to larger metropolises like Denver, not New York, but Phoenix, Los Angeles, Seattle, Oakland, and have them start lives, with promises of jobs, a bus ticket, a place to live. And a lot of times people would come into town and going, what the heck,
Ghetto, here I come.
I had a lot of personal experience with it because a lot of my kinfolk actually did move to Los Angeles from Oklahoma. And some of them made a go of it. Some of them came back. But they all had really interesting stories. And it's hard to find stuff from the 1950s about that whole program and what happened to people and the communities that they formed that when they got there. And I just wanted to put that out into the world and talk about that, because there's a lot of there's this film called The Exiles. I keep talking about it, and I really don't want to promote it, but it was a documentary done in 1956 of a group of Apache and Navajo Indians that came to Los Angeles that lived in Bunker Hill downtown. And it was what they called cinema verite. I mean, it's kind of like a reality show, but it was very, very staged, and it was a very negative portrayal of natives, as you can imagine. It was not filmed or written or anything by our people. It was a non-Indian person who definitely had an agenda. And, of course, that agenda at the time, and it seems like still today, is like the vanishing Indian and all of the woes, the drunkenness, the loneliness, the everything, about a vanquished people.
Right. The end of the trail is still very popular, right?
Yes. And that particular slice of life has been championed by a lot of academics in Los Angeles. It's like, that's what it was really like, man. That's the true story of natives, and I was like, no, it isn't. No.
Oh gosh.
So that's why I wanted to write this play, and I wanted to include humor and romance in it, because this is something that it's almost kind of radical for the plays and the projects that are out about Native people, because it's always these just dark, sad, just pity parties. I don't even know what to call them.
That's a good term. I think you nailed it there.
Yeah, because we're still here. You're on the radio. I'm out here doing comic books, and there's a lot of joy and humor and fun in our communities that never gets reflected in the popular media.
Now, our cultures have evolved so much, and then I think moving it to an urban setting, you get a brand new kind of animal there. You get natives who know their way how to get around in a city, but not necessarily an Indian kind of way, but kind of a what would you call it, a scheming kind of sense that develops. And you learn to get along or get by or survive, right?
Right, exactly. So true. And this family, the story of Round Dance is it's a group from Okmulgee that moves to Los Angeles in 1956, and the protagonist, who Therron played in the stage reading in October, is a guy named Rudy Cornell. And he is just there, just living life, and he's decided to call his mom and his sisters to come out and live with them, and they just it's one day at the gas station.
My gosh. Now, the information I've got here talks about him working in a gas station, which seems to be one of the aptitudes that our people seem to have to deal with a lot in the 50s, and it was a different world then, of course. Gallon of gas was about 20 cents. And he goes to what I see here in quoting, a seedy Indian bar.
Yes.
Now, it seems like every city I've ever visited has its Indian bar. That includes Washington, D.C., where I worked in that bar for a while. But
Yes.
whether or not you're into alcohol or not, but it seems like a central gathering place also, where you might see friends or relatives or get the latest word of what's going on. Now, why did you choose to go into that particular venue?
Well, this location, the Ritz Bar, is a real place, or was a real place in Los Angeles, and it also figured centrally in the Exiles. And I thought, what if there's another take on that Indian bar and what happens in that Indian bar? The only reason Rudy goes to this bar is because he wants to get a better job. He's got an offer to buy the owner of the gas station out and actually own it outright. And to him, it seems like a great idea. So he goes to this bar to meet somebody. And of course, as they say in Hollywood, hijinks ensue.
Oh, gosh.
This is where we see a lot of humor. We get to meet a group of native nurses that come to the bar and other people that are in the bar. And it figures centrally to what happens in the second act.
So does it rise to the level of what they called a rollicking adventure?
Yes, it does. There's all kinds of craziness that happens in that bar and afterwards when they return to the gas station at daylight. This is just one crazy day in this guy's life. And, it happens to be a really crucial day because, when you're telling a story, why is this important to tell? Well, important things happened on this day. I said it in, I think, June of 1956, the day after Elvis Presley appeared on the Milton Berle show, where he did the full frontal and the gyrations and he sang Hound Dog, and how the ripple effects it had.
Wasn't he only shown from the waist up on that thing?
Yes, because he was so scandalous.
Scandalous. Okay.
Yeah.
It sounds like there's a really a ton of complexities here in these particular roles. How is it that you got your cast to come across and deliver what you're looking for there? I mean, was there something that you said that you wanted from these artists that made the thing work?
Well, the thing about it was I incorporated a lot of family lore and friends that told me about their families that had really from Cherokee country moved to Los Angeles and started a gas station, and my own personal knowledge of Los Angeles and that time and the 1950s and what it was like there. Of course, I was not alive then. I can't say that I was there, but I've seen those locations and I've talked to people about what it was like. My cousin Jim McGirt was out there for a long time, and he and Randy Edmonds started this thing called the United Indian Development Association, which helped Native people get jobs, do their resumes, how to conduct themselves in interviews and things like that. So there were groups like that helped people. That again, it's like I heard about this as a kid, and I thought, why isn't that reflected in these stories? Why don't people talk about this? And again, because other people know this too. I'm not the only person that has this special knowledge. The actors came to it and said, oh, yeah, that sounds like what my grandpa said, or my aunties went out, and yeah, I know. Or they're still out there, So when they came to the material, they already knew what I was talking about. I didn't have to explain a lot, except for maybe for the younger folks, some of the references of, people from the 1950s. But other than that, it was like, oh, yeah, I've heard this story before. I know what this is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've lived this story before.
Yes.
Well, I was around in the 50s, too, but somehow the details escape me these days. But it's kind of the sort of thing that you'll find all around the nation. I mean, I've seen similar communities and setups, everywhere from like the Senecas in New York to the Alaska Natives and perhaps in Anchorage or Reno, something like that. So this is kind of something that all of us should connect to in some sort of fashion. Yeah,
I think so, because it's the story of any family that went from a rural, community to a big city. And it's a classic fish out of water story, all of those elements that make, good drama and good comedy. I tried to make sure those are there. And with our stuff in between.
Okay. Well, tell me about this Native American Play Festival going on in Oklahoma City. Is this something new? Is it something developed?
Gosh.
How did this happen?
Well, this Play Festival has been going on for 9 years. They're in their 9th year. And, in fact, I had written a play for them the first year that they had come out that was staged red, but it didn't make it to the final cut. Because what they do and what you'll see in between, if you do come this weekend, Saturday, Friday, I think it's just Saturday, they'll have 2 play readings of plays that they're looking to develop. This is how Round Dance happened, too. I submitted to the festival. They said, yes, we'd like to give the play a staged reading. And the audience gets to vote. I mean, if they really like the show, they can fill out the cards at the end and say, yeah, this is great. And Round Dance got a really high score, and that's how they decided, okay, we're going to take that script and develop it into a full play. So when people come to the theater, it's like any other show you might see at a professional theater with sets, lighting, music, sound cues, the whole thing, costumes, everything.
Let me ask you about the title, Round Dance. When I first read that, the visions of powwows came to mind, and people sidestepping in the dance and kind of a fellowship sort of thing. But that's not exactly what you're looking for people to take home with them after they've seen this play, right?
Well, yes and no, only because in Los Angeles, the Round Dance is like the staple dance of any kind of Native gathering that I've seen in the many years that I've been there, and also it's central to any powwows, like intertribal, everybody come out, and that's something that they do. And because in Los Angeles there are so many tribes out there, the Apaches will come out, and of course there'll be Kiowas, and everybody comes out to dance the Round Dance because they know that one, and it's an easy one for people to do. And it includes everybody in the community, so it's everybody. And I thought including that title, because this play isn't just about Creek people, there are Ponca Indians, like I said, there's Cherokees, there's a Potawatomi guy. They talk about absentee Shawnee. There's all different tribes that are included in this play, even though the Creek family is the central characters. But they talk about, and I thought, well, okay, this is like an intertribal. It's not just about one tribe. It's about the community of Los Angeles.
In the last couple of minutes we have here now, what do your non-native folks, how do they react to material like this? Do they get it, I think is what I'm saying.
Some of them get it, but the thing of it is we need as many Native people in the audience just to give the white folks permission to laugh. I'll be straight up honest, because sometimes they're afraid to laugh at us and the things that we do, or even if they find it kind of funny, it's like, is it okay to laugh at that? Yes, it's okay to laugh at that.
I think our good friend, the late Charlie Hill, used to pose that question to audiences, too, and after they got over being nervous, I think they got it and were able to laugh. Now, Okay, now let's talk about the logistics for folks who are interested in attending one of these performances. Go ahead and tell us where and when. Okay,
the play takes place at the City Space Theater, which is downstairs at the Civic Center Music Hall on 201 North Walker, and that's just north of Sheridan in downtown Oklahoma City. And the tickets are available online. And I hope that you've got stuff posted. There's stuff on my Facebook. It's the new Native American Play Festival, NANPF.org. You can find the link for tickets. They're $25 plus service fees, because that's what they do. The Civic Center does that. But Thursday, Friday, Saturday at 8 o'clock.
Oh, great.
And if you want to come to the the play readings, and my mom is going to be in one, they happen earlier in the day. I think they start about noon on Saturday, and those are free. So if you want to come spend a day in Oklahoma City, see the readings and the play, come on Saturday. And also Terry Zotai, the flautist, or native flute player, however you want to say it, is going to be there as well.
Flute players usually works. Okay, well, we're going to have to get out of here. We've got a couple of announcements to share, but we want to say thank you for taking time. When are you going to be back here? You going to be here for festival?
Yes, I'll be there. Look for me in my cowboy hat.
Okay, well, we have a 2-hour remote on Friday morning, so if you're around, come on in.
Hey, I will. I am going to be around. I'll drop by.
Okay, between 10 and 12. All right.
Okay.
Want to say, Mado, you have a good one and much success with your latest endeavor there.
Thanks, Gary. It's a pleasure. Privilege. Thank you.
All right. Have a good bye. All right. That was Arigon Starr. We're talking about some of her work and the new play. Let's take a second to share a couple of things, and we're going to be out of here.
Red Stick Gallery in Okmulgee, Oklahoma features items handmade or designed by Mvskoke Creek enrolled citizens from all over. Owned by the Mvskoke Creek Nation, the gallery proudly sells ribbon skirts and vests, Southeastern designed clothing, jewelry, prints, and many other items. For more information, visit www.creeknationgiftshop.com. Red Stick Gallery, located 105 South Grand Avenue in historic downtown Okmulgee.
Get ready to make memories. 4 days of free family fun comes to Okmulgee at the 44th Annual Mvskoke Creek Nation Festival, June 21st through 24th, featuring the Kids Carnival, traditional Mvskoke dances, arts and crafts, and food, softball, golf, horseshoes, and volleyball tournaments, and the All-Indian Rodeo that started it all. Live entertainment hits the stage on Friday and Saturday nights. All events are free and open to the public. It's the Mvskoke Creek Nation Festival, June 21st through the 24th in Okmulgee.
Okay, a couple of quick announcements here, and we'll be out of here. First of all, you can help out our youth. Got a fundraising breakfast going on the 15th from 8 to 10:30 at the Tribal Complex. All proceeds toward their service projects, biscuits and gravy, sausage biscuits, and bacon biscuits. Lots of biscuits. And if you get the chance during our festival, please stop by and say hello to our second chief. He's holding a open house on the 23rd from 11:30 till 1 p.m. at the main complex. Drop in, tell him what's on your mind, say howdy, that kind of thing. 732-7605. All right, well, thank you so much for joining us here on Mvskoke Radio. We appreciate you being with us. And we're going to be, at the festival on Friday morning, the 22nd. So please stop by and say howdy. You've been listening to Mvskoke Radio. Join us again next week for more local, tribal, and community news and updates. Mado.